Hello everyone, it's Jabbar here. Welcome to episode 5 of Misconceptions. So today I'm going to be talking about the popular belief that
y'all Negroes were selling your own people into slavery?
Oh hell no, y'all pale skinned cavemen come to Africa and kidnap our people and stole everything.
Today I'm going to be tackling both of those misconceptions. The misconception that Africans captured and sold their own people into slavery, and the belief that African slaves all came from European merchants who kidnapped African people from their villages. Also, before I begin, I already foresee a pretty depressing comment section similar to the one I got on my Moors video, and frankly there isn't really anything I could say or do to prevent that, but guys, this isn't a racial propaganda video. All parties responsible for the transatlantic slave trade are all dead now. Blacks, whites, and Arabs alike. There's no point in demonizing one another just because of the things that people have done in the past, because nobody alive today is responsible for what has happened. Yes, it was a very dark part of our history, and yes, it still has some long-reaching effects to this day. However, I assure you that the overwhelming majority of the people watching this video, black or white, have nothing to do with what's happened in the past. As many of you know, I typically avoid slavery in my videos as it's the dominant theme in the mainstream when it comes to black history, and we hear enough about it already. However, in this particular case, I think that it's necessary to discuss and clear up some of the most toxic misconceptions about slavery, as well as create an entirely new perspective and understanding of the topic. So first we'll cover the belief that Africans were selling other Africans, or blacks were selling other blacks, or however you'd like to word it. Slavery was a fact of life in much of sub-Saharan Africa in pre-colonial times, and not just the international trade to European or Arabic buyers either. Slavery was something that was also practiced intranationally throughout the continent, where African people were bought, sold, and captured within the continent of Africa itself. However, one important thing to note is that African people did not and still do not view themselves as one homogeneous ethnic group. What I mean by this is that contrary to the people of Africa, the cultural and ethnic identity that African Americans have is something that is based entirely on race. For example, if someone in the United States has the same physical features as an African, right away they are looked upon as an African American and are thus classified as belonging to the same ethnic group as those who share those features. Barack Obama is an excellent example. He is considered by most to be the first president of the United States belonging to the African American ethnic group, despite being born to a mother who was Caucasian. This mentality simply does not exist among African people. The criteria to fall within the same ethnic group as another person is significantly more precise and has little to nothing to do with skin color. As with all other human populations throughout Europe, Asia, Australia, and the Americas, Africans come from all walks of life, languages, cultures, and civilizations, and skin color has always had very little to do with their ethnic group. Simply put, being black was not, and still is not, the only criteria for being considered members of the same ethnic group among Africans. In pre-colonial times, it was common for African kingdoms to go to war with one another and sell all prisoners off into the transatlantic slave trade. Such is the case with the Anglophone countries of the Caribbean, with populations that largely descend from Ashanti slaves. This is due to the fact that the Fanti, who were allies of the British, frequently went to war with the Ashanti and sold all of their captives to the British, whom were allied to the Fanti at the time. In fact, the spirit, skill, or organization of these warriors didn't just disappear after they became enslaved, as they were known for being among the most rebellious groups of slaves in the New World, leading highly organized and often successful rebellions against the British, so much so that the British would call them Coromantes to distinguish them from the typical docile slave, a keepsake from Fort Coromantine, where they were shipped from, to the point where a bill was even passed to ban their importation to the Caribbean due to their rebellious reputation. So simply put, if one was to consider this as selling their own people, then the entire history of the world should be rewritten. The oppression against Jews in World War II should be considered whites oppressing whites, despite the fact that we all know very clearly that rivalries between the two groups was more than just skin deep. Pun intended. There is also a common belief that most slaves were primarily acquired by Europeans who simply raided coastal villages and kidnapped captives to take aboard their slave ships. While this was practiced at times by Arabic, European, and African peoples alike, it was a very dangerous operation and often unsuccessful, as the peoples they encountered did not go out without a fight. As I mentioned previously in my video on the Mali Empire, when the Portuguese first attempted to raid the coastal towns and villages along the Gambia in the 15th century, they were continuously defeated and eventually forced to sign treaties with the Empire of Mali, whom had control over the region at the time. This pattern was also seen in the Congo Kingdom. While relations between the Portuguese and the Congo Kingdom began on friendly terms, the Portuguese gradually began to undermine Congo's influence and even capture its citizens as slaves. Previous agreements between the Portuguese and the Congo Kingdom allowed the Portuguese to only capture slaves from places other than the Congo Kingdom. As Portugal saw an increasing demand for labor, they began raiding Congo's villages and towns from within the borders of the kingdom. This was obviously a huge no-no for the Kingdom of Congo, and they strongly resisted this through several wars and conflicts, until eventually, the entire kingdom was conquered by the Portuguese in the 17th century. In the majority of cases, it was much more dangerous, expensive, and difficult for Europeans to capture slaves on their own when they could simply just purchase them from markets in African kingdoms, whom acquired their slaves largely through warfare with their neighbors and rivals, rather than kidnapping. So in conclusion, Africans didn't really sell their brothers or sisters or moms or uncles or even their own countrymen into slavery. The belief that all blacks, or all Africans, are one united people is a concept that was invented by white Americans and has come to dominate the culture of the United States to present day. Different races of people from all around the world continuously had rivalries with one another, and their race or skin color was usually the least of their concerns in regards to what led to that rivalry or unity. From the ancient and medieval wars of Europe to the conquests of Genghis Khan, language, culture, religion, power, and trade have always been the bigger driving factors towards ethnic identity, as opposed to race or skin color. Africans were also not captured like wild animals, like popularly portrayed. Of course, small instances of kidnapping people to sell into slavery had happened in Africa and several other places around the world, including coastal Europe by Moorish and Arabic slave hunters. However, the bulk of all captives sold into slavery were done on a massive scale through warfare and rivalries between different ethnic groups. Rivalries that were defined not by race, but by politics and ethnic identity. The whole idea of blackness being associated with being a slave is something that was created in the past few centuries by European and American slave owners. Thanks for watching, guys. Be sure to check out the new From Nothing community website, where I'll be regularly posting all sources used in my videos. The site also includes a community forum, a Discord server with nearly 200 members, and a soon-to-be highly detailed and accurate interactive map of pre-colonial African civilizations. Of course, this will all be free, so join the Empire from Nothing. And always remember, we don't come from nothing.